Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to our webinar. Today we're going to be talking about 2021 networking trends, and we'll hopefully be helping you figure out which ones are hyped versus which ones are helpful. I'm thrilled to be joined here today by Joel Mulkey, who's the founder and CEO at Bigleaf, and Jonathan Petkevich, who is our VP of Product. Joel and Jonathan, please give us a little bit of information about your background, in the industry, how long you've been in this industry, and your time with Bigleaf.
Yeah, thanks for the intro, Tanya. So my foray into really deep technology began in 2004 when I helped start a fixed wireless internet service provider. And so I've had interesting view on networking over the last, almost 17 years. And have enjoyed seeing how things have morphed. Some very relevant topics we're going to bring up today as it relates to wireless connectivity. I've been very close to as I built out a regional fixed wireless network and helped create a managed Wi-Fi offering and things like that. And then now, of course, coming up with the concept for Bigleaf and a lot of the initial technology, I've got a view into how I sort of perceive some of the trends going on in the space today, and I'm excited to talk through that a bit.
Yeah, well, Jonathan Petkevich here. I've been in the networking industry for 12, 13 years. I don't know. I've started to lose count, which I think is probably a good sign. So I've had a chance throughout my entire career to see the kind of changes to the market and the technology and the way that businesses have built their networks and monitored those and how different things have impacted them over time, like how quickly trends impact them. And so I came on board with Bigleaf about 10 months ago to bring a lot of that knowledge and experience to help shape the path forward. And the talking through the networking trends of coming up in the next year it feels very much at home with everything I've seen over the last decade plus.
Great. Well, a couple of housekeeping things as we get started. I just want to let everyone know we will have a couple minutes for questions hopefully at the end. So if you have questions, please type them into the question box in the GoToWebinar window. We also will be recording this, so you don't need to furiously take notes. We'll send the recording out to you so that you can review it later on as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about what's been happening in 2020 and looking forward into 2021. So really 2020, what can we say? Started out with some very unexpected things, and it really redirected a lot of the plans that we had around our focus and what we were going to be doing for the year. But as we move into the new year, we kind of have a renewed focus, and we can really adjust. We've adjusted to the kind of what we call the new normal, and we can renew that focus and look at what's ahead towards 2021 and make the adjustments and look at some of the trends that are impacting our businesses as we look ahead. So today we're here to talk about what people are talking about, what's currently trending in the topics that are related to network connectivity, really what's relevant for your business and what's just the hype around conversations that are happening today, and how you can direct your focus towards 2021 on what really matters to your business. The first topic we're going to be talking about is working from home. That's a big one for many of us. If you look at some of the stay-at-home mandates that have happened over the course of 2020, we estimate that about 85 million people are working from home, and that's a big shift towards where we were at the start of 2020. So it's at some point during the year, 88% of organizations actually asked employees or required employees to work from home starting in about the mid-March timeframe, and about 57% of the US workforce started to work from home on a regular basis. So that was a big shift towards most people working in the office with a few people working remotely in regional or local areas. And a lot of organizations have been talking about how they're switching to a more long-term remote work from home strategy. So many companies like Twitter have said that they're not going to require their employees to work from the office ever again. Some companies are saying that they're going to revisit their strategies for working in the office starting in kind of the second half of 2021, if that. So many companies are really looking at what the long-term strategy is for their workforce for working in the office and in working from home. So some of the things that we're hearing, the conversations that are happening, companies are moving to working from home indefinitely. Is that going to really happen? We needed to move all the technology to the cloud right away, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to be effective in what we're doing with so many people working from home. And IT and network infrastructure folks are being told that they need to revamp their networks now in order to support this kind of new normal of what we're looking for. So I have a quick poll I'm going to share with you. We kind of want to know what you think your workforce will look like heading into 2021. We're just interested to get some feedback from you, which will help us kind of direct the discussion towards our strategy of working from home.
While folks are voting, I'll weigh in with just kind of share what Bigleaf's been talking about. Our current thought, as our executive team discusses, has morphed really. Back before the pandemic, I was not excited about folks working from home full time. I think it's really important to have face-to-face interactions, and it's a lot harder to do remote well. And I still feel like it's difficult to do it really well, but we are looking ahead to having some sort of a part-time work from home program where folks would be in the office sometimes and not in the office, working from home as kind of fits their needs and the needs of their teams.
Yeah. Well, that aligns really well with the stat of our poll results. So most people think it's going to be some combination of permanent work from home employees and in-office staff. So that's really interesting that we're not the only company that's kind of headed in that direction. So I'm interested to hear your comments and feedback on the trend of what you think the reality is going to be on working from home as we move into 2021.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the result of permanently go back to the office is very low. And I think it'd be interesting to hear who the folks are that are answering the poll, because if I look at like the landscape of businesses, surely some businesses, that's just their business model. They have to work in office. They're a retail or a restaurant situation. And imagine for a lot of small businesses that have more of a sort of traditional way of doing business, working from home is very uncomfortable and difficult for them. They want to go back to that model. But then you look at these larger enterprises, the Twitters and Googles of the world, who they've got technology that can readily be embracing kind of work from anywhere, and they're sort of forward thinking to say, hey, how can we morph our culture and how we do business to embrace that? Clearly, they think that's a good choice. I think the reality is going to be mixed. It's going to be the whole breadth of options there. I'd be pretty surprised if the current percentage of folks working from home is the same way in a year, 2 years, but clearly we're not going back to normal, to the old normal, if you will.
Yeah, I think this upcoming year is really going to be kind of the inflection point of what's going to happen with remote, businesses, or working with the majority employees not being in the office anymore. I'd be curious to know what that poll would have looked like probably 12 months ago. To your point earlier, that would have been a drastically different result, and there probably would have been more combination and more permanently in the office than the alternative that we saw there. So I think for me, I'm looking forward. A lot of the data seems to be indicating that, this year we'll probably, meaning 2021, we'll see a lot of that combination where there's people working who are now permanently remote that have found, great efficiency and success in doing so and enjoy that type of environment and work style. It's probably going to be just as many that feel the opposing way and want to be in the office and doing so. But I think that when we look beyond 2021, and so this kind of initial trend, it tells me that work from home is only going to grow at a continued rate versus where it was growing, but much slower pace. This just kind of gave that the kick in the butt to kind of pick up the the adoption rate. And once you've adopted the tools and the connectivity solutions you need for that type of environment to work well, you've kind of invested in that strategy going forward. And I see a lot more businesses doing that.
Mhm. So more importantly, as we look at more companies with people that are working from home, what do you feel like businesses should be considering to be able to ensure reliable connectivity and performance of the applications for all the people that are, really required for their business to run efficiently?
Yeah, it's funny. So today I'm in our office. I come in once a month or so to deal with some need, in person here. And I was remarking on the background of our slide where that woman's on her cell phone, and I'm looking at my desk phone that I haven't used in months. Everything I do is on my cell phone, basically. It's so remarkable how, at least in our business, I know many others, the whole technology landscape is changing. And for us, we were pretty well prepared for that with a very cloud-based existence. But this notion of work from anywhere, your technologies and your applications has, I think, really been embraced and accelerated quite a bit lately. And so I think for us, we're seeing that the impact of that is, all right, how's your network? Because if your applications are in the cloud and you're consuming them from different places, different devices, well, then what matters is what's in between. Between your device that you're using and that cloud server, you've got to have a healthy path. Otherwise, you're not going to have a usable experience. And so I think that's where folks, they got to think about security, obviously. They've got to secure their data whenever their team is out and about in their home or in the coffee shop or whatever. But they also have to think about quality of connectivity. Because if that connection's not reliable, how are you going to be on that sales call? How responsive is your ERP system when you're needing to place an order? Those are the sorts of things that we're seeing customers running into.
Yeah, I'll comment, I think somewhat in line with that, Joel. I think the majority here is, right, you kind of gone from an environment where if you had everything on site, it's manageable, right? You have a lot of control over the immediate needs if it's all based in your site. You're hosting everything in your site. You have all your employees there. You can build kind of the legacy management tools and monitoring tools to maintain control of that. And you could adopt you adopt your connectivity tools for the entirety of the business to then connect out. Whereas now you're into a whole different spectrum where you're dealing with, crappy internet connection to someone's apartment, or, someone who's remote but might be in a rural area that doesn't have always the best connectivity. It may not even have a landline to connect on. They may have to use, wireless connectivity solutions. So I think there's a whole notion of looking at how do you secure, but also how do you ensure people have the ability to access the cloud applications without any sort of impact to their business and into their efficiency and productivity. I think that's been a primary driver probably for a lot of businesses looking at retaining on-site staff is I can't guarantee that, or I'm unaware of a way to guarantee that.
Yeah, I know for me, to your point, Jonathan, about wireless, I don't have a landline at home. I'm in a rural area. I don't have any decent broadband connectivity, so I have different wireless connections. And without Bigleaf, I just wouldn't be able to work from home. Like I couldn't be on calls, video sessions, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so work from home, hyped or helpful?
Yeah, I think it is helpful. I mean, clearly it's huge in sustaining our economy right now in the midst of needing to isolate. If we couldn't work from home, I mean, imagine the impacts. Look at what's happening to folks that have physical only jobs. It's really tough on them. So I'm very thankful. Not only do we have a sort of work we can do remotely, but technology is enabling us to be successful in that. So I do see it today very helpful and ongoing in some form, probably a little more limited, being a huge part of life.
Yeah, I agree. I think definitely it's helpful. It's also from the human component, it introduces a level of flexibility for people who are able to engage in that type of work style. You have the notion now that for the most part, you're able to live a lot of your life and be in places that you choose to be when you're working versus, a lot of the movement where you were relegated to the general local geographic area. This introduces a whole notion. So for me, I think not only for the business and being more efficient and, acquiring talent across the country, right? Where you were in a small town, you might have a harder time attracting talent. Now you can go off to other parts of the country and pull in top tier talent for your business and grow. But there's also the human side of being able to be in those different places and enjoy that, but also still work and be productive.
Awesome. Right, so let's move on and talk about some of the networking trends. So according to Gartner, Wi-Fi is the primary high performance network technology that companies are going to be using through 2024. And about 96% of organizations use some form of wireless technology, with many of those companies looking to move to faster versions of those networking capabilities in the next couple of years. So I'm interested to hear a little bit about what's going on in our folks that are on the phone today in a poll. So in 2021, are you looking to implement 5G or Wi-Fi 6 technology?
If you're like me and don't like the term Wi-Fi 6 because it's not formal, that means 802.11ax.
We'll give everybody just a minute to vote here. But it's quite interesting. Some of the conversations that we're seeing coming around this topic is really that, speed and enabling the more technologies is really what's driving move ahead. We've got a good number of folks have voted, so I'm going to close the poll and share the results. Oh, it's really quite interesting. A number of you are looking to move to one of those. Right, so let's look at some of the conversations that are happening. You need more speed. It's better with lower latency. These things are soon to become a standard, which we need to get on board with right now. Everyone else is implementing it, so I must also implement it. So curious to hear your thoughts about these technologies, Joel and Jonathan, and what you think they're going to do to impact businesses moving ahead.
Yeah, Jonathan, you want to go first this time?
Yeah, definitely. So first off, that poll is interesting. That was it's a bit of data that I don't know if I was expecting so many folks to be looking at 5G. And I'll leave a little of that for you, Joel, to drill into. But for me, there's an element here of ensuring that you have technology that's built on the latest standards, which makes sense. So from that perspective, I can understand why this would be somewhat of a need for businesses. But overall, I don't know that these are drastically changing or modifying how a business operates day to day, where they need to consider, implementing Wi-Fi 6 across, right? I think the interesting bit of data there to kind of break apart would be, if you're looking at Wi-Fi 6 or you're looking at 5G, are you looking at that for your standard business office, or are you looking at that from a work from home remote employee perspective? Because I imagine that if we start to break up the data set, we're looking at most of the remote employee workforce. 5G and Wi-Fi 6 may not be top of mind, probably not even in the discussion. So I think there's a little bit of an overhype around the speed and the performance and some of the promise that's with both of these. But I think there's an element, Joel, that you can kind of go into, which is more of what they were built on in terms of like the fundamental message of why they came about, but just where they might have missed.
Yeah, these are interesting technologies because your wireless connectivity has changed life a lot. If you think back 20 years ago, everything had to have an Ethernet cord, and your cell phone, you pressed three times to get to the right letter, right? I mean, it was just a whole new world when the iPhone came out and when Wi-Fi really got good enough to replace Ethernet-based, Cat5 connectivity. So admittedly, these technologies are key to the continued morphing and evolution of how we connect to our applications and our data. However, I think a couple of problems. Wi-Fi 6 is a bit misplaced in the priorities, and 5G is a marketing mess. And I'll dive into those separately. Wi-Fi 6, there's some good stuff there, but it's good for, as far as technology, it's good for really dense, high bandwidth needs. So if you have an office with 1,000 people in a small area, Wi-Fi 6 has some cool technologies that will help you out. Or if you're trying to provide Wi-Fi offload in a stadium, sweet, this will be advantageous. But if you're a normal person and you've got a house with a couple kids and you need to make sure you know Wi-Fi dropouts when you're on Zoom calls or whatever you're doing, I don't see Wi-Fi 6 moving the needle there. In fact, I think it's harmful. The Wi-Fi industry has become so focused on a story of faster, 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 that the pace of innovation is at the sacrifice of reliability. I mean, our own office here, we have some pretty advanced Wi-Fi technology. I don't remember which version, probably AC, and we have troubleshot mere connectivity. Can we get packets back and forth? It's not about speed. We don't have issues with speed. Everything we do is in the cloud, so we're limited by our internet connections, which are 100 megs or something. The notion of going from multi-hundred megs to a gigabit, for example, just is irrelevant as it relates to Zoom and Office 365 and VoIP and everything that's common. If you're an architect and you're moving 3 terabyte files around all the time, all right, let's talk about Wi-Fi 6. If you're most businesses that you're just trying to interact with folks and do basic things, work with typical data, moving from 802.11ac to Wi-Fi 6 is going to do nothing for you. What you really need is a stable Wi-Fi connectivity that doesn't drop out, that deals really well with roaming, that has some more intelligence to the quality of connectivity rather than prioritizing speed. So I think Wi-Fi 6 is promising for a niche set of folks that really need speed. For everybody else, hopefully it brings some reliability improvements. I just haven't seen that. I think that really is more about the vendors getting their bugs solved and working with the client devices carefully to have really consistent behavior. Now 5G is interesting because there's some really promising stuff there. I mean, imagine if you didn't even need Wi-Fi, you just always had always-on connectivity from all your devices at, say, 100 megabits a second. That would be pretty cool. And that was the vision that was cast for it. The problem is it's all hype. What you need for the really high speeds is this millimeter wave connectivity, and it's really going to only be available in dense urban areas. So the folks that absolutely need good 5G today in rural areas or suburban areas without good landline connectivity, well, you're probably not going to get that millimeter wave behavior, surely not in rural areas. And then the more typical frequency range that's a lower frequency that can go longer distances, we really have most of the benefits, if not all of them, with 4G today. So the evolution from 4G to 5G in these longer distance connections is minimal to nothing. In fact, you have AT&T who announced what they call 5G evolution, and they market that. Your phone shows 5G E on it, I think. That's actually just 4G. It's just a marketing term slapped on 4G. Now 4G has iterated over time. It's gotten better since your phone first said 4G on it. They've built new technologies into it. So it's really this slow morphing. It's not like when it says 4G versus says 5G, you're going to magically be able to stream 3D, Star Wars style holograms. That may come someday, but that is not 2021.
Yeah, and I think you kind of hit on the key case there, right, which is around the marketing messaging with 5G. I look at this iteration as, well, just another step in the sequence, it's nothing major, but things that are more, satellite based, like Starlink, right? Those technologies that are talking about broad spectrum coverage into very rural areas and promising, some decent data rates with some, performance perks in terms of latency. That's a big deal. 5G, yeah, it's a good marketing message to get some new phones out there and get some new antennas in an iPhone, but less so for the vast majority of people who are actually probably, like you said, reliant on wireless connectivity as their primary connection source.
Yeah, the folks that seem to have the toughest time with WAN internet connectivity are those in rural areas or suburban areas that have been a little abandoned by the telecom and cable operators. So Starlink is pretty cool looking, because the issue with traditional satellite is latency, and Starlink fixes that, and other low Earth orbit satellite technologies. So it'll be pretty cool to see that play out. Hopefully they can deliver on the promises there. And then as it relates to 4G and 5G, I guess I don't want to bash it too hard. I'm bashing the hype of 5G. I'm not bashing cellular connectivity. I mean, that's one of the connections I have at my house. It's frankly the most reliable connection performance-wise I have at my house as compared to my two other styles of connection. So it is definitely a useful technology, especially in those more rural or suburban areas. I just think it's overhyped.
Yeah, and I'll wrap it with on my side with saying that it's at least good to see that the technology is, from a bandwidth perspective, way ahead where we need it today, because I'm sure that as, you know, even with higher resolution streaming, the data consumption is going to do anything but increase. It's just going to get higher. So it's nice to see that we're on the different side of the spectrum here, where we're saying, hey, you probably don't need all of these if you do have access to them, but hey, at some point you probably will, and you'll be thankful that it's there. But to your point, yeah, great technology, but just marketing wise, it's overextension of how valuable it'll be to a good chunk of the people.
Mm-hmm.
So given your thoughts on that, do you really feel like these, you know, the speed and advanced tech enablement really matter when it comes to network connectivity, enough to make them a priority for IT folks as they look into 2021?
I think you got to look at what's your business doing? What are key applications and what are their requirements? For most people, it's SaaS and cloud-based tools that they don't need a gigabit per second. They need, say, 10 megabits a second to be effective, but it has to be reliable and performant. If it's full of packet loss and jitter and things like that, you're going to have upset users. So you know, look at, okay, do I really need huge amounts of bandwidth? Yes or no? Some people do, most people don't. Okay, once I define that, what sort of connectivity tools do I need to make use of to ensure that that bandwidth I need is delivered effectively?
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. I think that's dead on.
So it looks like 5G, Wi-Fi 6, hyped, a little bit of hype, huh?
Yes.
That's
the job of those marketing folks. they're trying to get us to buy.
Yep. So looking ahead, we're going to talk a little bit about AI, and you know, AI has been a buzzword that companies are using to really hype their kind of advanced technologies. You know, looking at some of the industry trends, we find that 44% of IT decision makers believe that AI and machine learning can help companies optimize their network performance. And more than 50% of them identified AI as a priority investment needed to deliver their ideal network and make things work for them. So some of the conversations that we're seeing is, you know, AI can really lead to autonomous self-operating networks. They can help things be a little bit more hands-off for IT folks in particular. They can make predictions based upon network data and offer self-remediation for folks, again, making their jobs a lot easier. And then the third kind of element we hear is that, you know, AI is going to take my job away. It's going to make IT folks obsolete because it's going to do my job for me. So what are your thoughts on AI technology, what's available today, and how can that technology really create self-operating networks?
Yeah, I think that there's probably two main ways that AI is in use today. You have the consumer-facing flavor, so Siri in my iPhone, or the way that Google can find me images of apples if I ask it to, you know, the image recognition. And then you have the hidden AI that nobody knows about other than the people in the know, which are, how is it that every time I put in a Google search, the response is instantaneous? Well, I can almost guarantee you it's not because there's a bunch of people making sure those packets get back and forth. They've built some really smart technology that surely would fall under the definitions of AI to make sure that your request for Google gets to the right server from the right path and gets back to you as efficiently and effectively as possible. So yes, those technologies are available today. The challenge is they're not available to the everyday person. They're available to these big companies that have teams dedicated to them. And we're in that bucket. We've dedicated some folks to figuring out, hey, how can we make our network behave in an autonomous manner far better than it could if there were just people controlling it. And so there's some cool things going on there. I mean, think about another example, Amazon's website. You go to Amazon.com, imagine how many gazillions of dollars of orders are placed on that per moment. What if that went down? I mean, they surely have AI in the back end of everything they're doing to make sure that their website does not go down and that it is reachable and quick.
Yeah, I think there's a kind of a misconception that when we talk about AI, the first thought is all the wonderful movies that have come out over the years of
Yeah.
somehow things are not going to go so well for us humans, or we're all going to be kind of out of work. The reality is, to your point, right? I think where we are now is there's a lot of innovation going on to make this more tangible and more practical for businesses to use on the smaller scale, and not reserve it for the large enterprises of the world, right? And make it more generally available. I think that's great because it looks, there's things we can do, especially if we talk about in the network industry that are, there's a lot of remedial tasks that, IT folks have to go through on a regular basis. But wouldn't it be great if, there were tools more regularly available to help with a lot of those remedial tasks that takes that off your mind? So at night, you're not thinking, oh no, I must go do those 20 things when I get in the morning, but rather, oh, now I've got the interesting challenges or problems I need to go solve when I get in. Now I get to have fun with everything I know and everything I'm experienced with. And I get to go have a more meaningful impact. I think we're kind of in that phase where this is slowly getting there. I don't know, like ourselves, we're trying to solve that and bring that to businesses, but I don't know that that's as far ahead from an industry or market perspective as it probably should be.
Mhm.
Yeah, the networking space, you've kind of got these two bubbles. You have huge enterprises that build all their own stuff. I mean, Google's building their own network routers and switches and technology. And then you have everybody else that's using what vendors create and market. And unfortunately, the amazing advances that have happened in this bubble haven't really made it to this one, at least not broadly. So you go to your typical router, switch, network monitoring system, et cetera, and they all are using the main principles that existed 20 years ago. Hey, let's connect these things and set some things up manually. Okay, maybe there's a little bit of automation in how we set it up, but then here's all these events that happen and syslogging, and you got to interpret everything. You got to have humans managing the network. And not that we don't love humans, but frankly, at the pace of IT today, they just can't keep up. And you got people working till 1 a.m. trying to figure out what's going on with this weird issue when users are now expecting the AI-driven experience created by those behemoths and the quality that that brings, that if you're going to make for happy, effective users, you've got to bring some AI-based technology into this other bubble so that the everyday business, the car dealership with 20 locations, or the medical clinic, or the mom and pop shop, they can get the same benefits for their folks trying to connect to Office 365 and Zoom and their ERP and whatever they're doing. And that's what Bigleaf's passionate about is, hey, how can we bring this autonomous intelligence to connecting to your key apps? So yes, our technology is available to that business today, and we're continuing to invest in how can we bring the smarts of AI to what everybody needs, which is connecting to the SaaS and cloud.
Yeah, I want to touch on the scales comment because we did a webinar, I don't remember how many months ago, on our risks monitoring launch. And in there, we actually described how many alerts and incidents, typical IT folks are engaging with. And in the majority of cases, some of them were as much as 1 million a day. So when we talk about scale, we're not talking like you might get 10 emails and okay, that's a lot. Maybe that's a lot for you, but no, we're talking tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of incidents that need some sort of filtering. Maybe there's additional look into it, some change, configuration adjustment, whatever happens to be the case, logical deployment of whatever it is, new virtual infrastructure. But that's a lot. And so AI from that perspective, that's huge. Imagine not having that kind of queue coming in every day. Those millions of alerts, 100,000 alerts gone, completely gone. You don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that becomes kind of a case for machine reasoning, right? Where the AI is actually looking at all of those alerts and kind of helping to reason whether or not someone needs to humanly follow up with them, or if they're okay to ignore for now, or we're going to monitor it for a little while longer and see what happens, right?
Mm-hmm. When I've thought about AI in the past, I've often thought about machine learning, this sort of pattern matching notion. And the challenge for us is that machine learning takes some pretty sophisticated technologies, and the use cases are, I shouldn't say limited, but to some extent limited. Whereas machine reasoning is the way I think about that, like taking the decisions a human would make with all the data available and building that into software. So the computer is making the same or better decisions as a human, but far faster and more scalably. And we've done that from the beginning. We just haven't called it AI because, I don't know, I didn't want to overhype what we're doing, as well as I had more thought about that machine learning case. But as we think about machine reasoning, I mean, that's the perfect explanation to what Bigleaf does, is say, how can we take the decisions you as a network engineer would make or an IT administrator, build that into the network and automate that, and then just let you know, hey, here's what's happened, here's what's going on that you might need to know about or care about.
Machine reasoning is a much more valuable component too, because that's where the work is actually being offloaded rather than just pattern matching.
Yeah, and its use cases are more broad. You could apply machine reasoning to really everything a human would do. You know, it's the scary thing of we're going to replace all your jobs, but actually we're not. What's going to happen is what we've seen of we automate the behaviors that are kind of boring and everybody hates, and then we release folks to go focus on problems that are innovative, that are challenging, that you really want to spend your time on.
Mm-hmm. So is AI helpful, or is it just a cool moniker that companies are using to describe their technology and make it sound cool?
All of the above. It depends on the company and how you're applying it. I think we're early days with it, and like I said, you got kind of those two bubbles of, yeah, use it as a marketing label or really have it cool under the covers in big companies, or hey, it's Siri. Bigleaf, we're hoping to bring a middle ground there of really effective AI for folks that can't have a 100-person machine learning division.
Yeah, for me, I can't imagine ever releasing a product and not trying to make it sound cool. So yeah, definitely, you always want that. But yeah, I'm hopeful that this is something we can continue to iterate on. Like you said, in terms of where we are in the curve, you know, there's definitely broad spectrum need. There's probably equally as much appeal to what it could potentially do for businesses across the various roles and functions. So for me, looking forward, yeah, this is huge, right? We're trying to, we've done this with our software stack and what we're doing with our services. I think the sky's the limit here of what this could ultimately do for us. But for 2021, it's just another step in the path to get to where it'll be much more broadly available.
Yeah. So as we look ahead towards 2021, do you have any advice or ideas about how IT decision makers should approach the trends that we've talked about today as they move ahead?
Yeah, I think, I mean, where I would start is what applications are my users using, like I mentioned earlier, and then what do I need to know about them? I think know how much bandwidth they need. Think about how you're going to secure the data. Those are starting points. And then once and I think we've seen that with a lot of customers, like they just start there, but make sure you continue on the thought process, which is, okay, now that we've got basic functionality, the car starts and runs, does it have air conditioning? And is the steering tight? And do the blinkers work? Which in our world is, how is the quality of your connectivity? Do you even know? Do you have visibility into that? Do you know if your users are having dropouts all the time? If their connectivity is full of garbage packet loss, or maybe it's perfect and they're totally happy. Get that data and then start having a plan to have a correct level of connectivity for their needs. Maybe the user can have outages and they don't need a whole lot of performance, cool. Or maybe they're on Zoom calls all day long and they're doing sales work and outages and dropouts, lose big dollars. Now you got to start thinking about, or what sorts of technologies can I put in to resolve that? And that's where Bigleaf can be a really valuable tool, where we can bring that visibility to inform you what your connectivity is like and how your users are using it, and then solve those connectivity issues of quality and reliability.
Yeah, for me, I look at 2021 as it's a great year to get to know the people of your business, right? typically IT has lived as this notion of this bubble within the org that is making all sorts of decisions. But now that there is, as we saw with the survey data, more and more folks working remotely, it's time to understand the personas that are in your own organization and understand their uses. So like you mentioned, Joel, looking at the types of activities they're doing on a daily basis. What are their needs in terms of connectivity? Do they have the right bandwidth setup? Do they have the right kind of performant connection, right, where the things are operating as they should be? I think this is going to be a great year of learning. I think for a lot of IT orgs, and it's going to be a great year of seeing IT become more people-centric versus where I think IT a lot has often taken on the approach of being very technology-centric, right? There's a lot of technology decisions that are made, and sometimes I think people disconnect that from themselves, versus now with so many folks working remotely, you've got to marry the two together in your strategy going forward, or else what you may decide doesn't necessarily work across the board or for particular departments or for a large group, right? If you have a large amount of salespeople and you make a technology decision that's not so great for their connectivity, that's going to have impacts.
Yeah. Maybe I'll speak specifically to WAN connectivity. You know, as we look ahead to 2021, I am excited about low Earth orbit satellite, and I do think if you as a business have WAN connectivity that's rough today, quality is poor, bandwidth is poor, I would look into cellular-based connectivity, because 4G or 5G, whatever label you want to put on it, is a good tool in the tool bucket. Would I use it on its own? If I had to, I guess. I'm always a big fan of redundancy. Put two in, even if they're two cheap circuits. Two cheap circuits is always better than one expensive one as it relates to reliability, and often as it relates to performance with a Bigleaf type solution. So I would definitely look at that trend and think carefully about how can I apply that to the needs of our business.
Two cheap circuits, that's the premise of why SD-WAN is such a good solution set, right? I mean,
yep.
You don't need an expensive circuit anymore to facilitate your business.
Yeah, and there's reality there. I mean, if you're an architecture firm moving giant files all over, well, 5 megs of cellular might not meet your needs. Fiber connection is probably something to think about, but having diversity there is very valuable.
Yeah, so one of the things we wanted to talk about is what Bigleaf can deliver for your business when it comes to networking. So we really can make sure that your network stays connected, that we can load balance the data that's coming across your network, provide same IP failover so that you don't have to worry about if a connection goes down, switching over to a new IP address, everything stays the same. And it really helps with cloud applications. So all cloud applications can be balanced and prioritized based upon things like VoIP or Zoom calls or other things that you want to prioritize for your business. So with that shameless plug out of the way, I want to open it up for audience Q&A. We have a couple of minutes left, and I have a quick poll that I'm going to launch while we gather questions. I'm going to look through. We have a few questions and a few comments, so I'm just going to be looking through those while the poll is open. If you'd like to learn more about Bigleaf, we'd really love to talk to you. Make sure that you select yes, and we'll get back to you to talk about how our solution can help with your network connectivity. There are a couple questions. Joel, I think you might have touched on this a little bit earlier, but someone asked can SD-WAN architecture, do you think that will be able to run on 4G or 5G connections alone?
Sure, yeah. I mean, you can do a single cellular connection, 4G or 5G, or multiple. We've got users who've got 2 or 3 cellular connections connected to our service. It works great. It's a way that you can do like one AT&T, one Verizon, even throw a Sprint or a T-Mobile in there if you want even more diversity. Watch out for resellers. So if you get an AT&T and then another lesser known brand name that actually uses AT&T as their network, well, you don't have the diversity you might have thought. So make sure you're thinking about and talking to whoever you're buying from, hey, what's the underlying network if it's one of those lesser known brands. But yes, as far as Bigleaf SD-WAN is concerned, it works with any kind of internet connectivity that can be handed off on a Cat5 Ethernet cable. So when we use cellular today, we've got an external router that connects to that. We have brainstormed about building it into our routers. That's a long conversation, but we're thinking through that. So yeah, it's a great form of connectivity on its own or as an additional circuit.
Yeah, we're also interested to hear from you if there are other trends you'd be interested in learning about us discussing in future webinars. So if you have trends that you'd like us to cover, just type those into the question box as well. We'd love to hear from you there. I do have another question about the work from home transition, and that is, can you discuss the #1 pain point you have found during the work from home transition?
Well, I have a strong opinion on that, which is face-to-face interactions. As someone who is in an executive role, my day revolves around working with people and digging through difficult things and collaborating. And I find it much more fulfilling and easy when it's in person. So it's been tough to do that remote on Zoom, and I mean, we're doing it. It's successful. It's just harder for everybody. It's fatiguing. It's a little harder to sense body language and what people are thinking. So that's the #1 thing to me of why I'm excited to get back to some presence in the office.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that's been a major one. I think the other notion is there's a lot of conversations that occur in an office when you're face to face, and the transition to tying a little bit into what I think has been coined as like a Zoom fatigue, right? The proliferation of scheduling a lot of video calls to make up for some of that face-to-face interaction. So that's been a transition challenge, and thankfully we do have all of the connectivity solutions we do, so that at least when we have them, it's clean. I can't imagine trying to do this transition without that and having things being disrupted and video quality being a mess. That would not be fun.
Yeah. If I represent our employees, I've definitely heard from some folks who they don't have a good environment at home to work. They got young kids that are having a tough time getting care for them, or just not a good space to be a quiet, dedicated space. So those are some challenges that I know some folks deal with.
We have a question. They'd like us to talk a little bit more about our work from home product and what successes we've had with colleges.
Oh yeah. So we in March launched what we call Bigleaf Home Office. And this is essentially all the benefits of Bigleaf, but really oriented around the needs of the home office. A little different price point and some tweaks to make it so that it fits in that home office environment really well. And so we've seen that very successful in the deployments we've had, where we're cleaning up quality of applications, even when there's only one circuit, doing things like slowing down your kid's Netflix so that your Zoom or your Teams is successful and isn't interrupted. And then also, if you happen to have redundant circuits or want them, being able to use up to 4 WAN connections through our service. So that's been a great way to take the connectivity needs you have in the business and bring them to the home environment. As it relates to colleges, we've seen some folks making use of that both on the teaching side, so your professor can have a good video session, and then on the student and other folks who need to consume that and collaborate together. No matter what you're doing in cloud and SaaS, the technology is enabling those apps to work like they were meant to.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, we have a comment from a customer who says that we're the best service they've ever deployed. Their Comcast circuit was down for 5 hours last night, and we didn't miss a packet due to Bigleaf. So thank you for being a customer. We really appreciate that.
Love to hear it.
Yeah, it's great.
We get feedback almost, well, multiple times a week from customers saying how great our technology, especially our support team is. So it's really encouraging. Please keep it coming.
Yeah. There is a question about 5G. Do you believe it can be implemented well in rural areas?
So 5G, you've got kind of this evolution of radio technologies, larger bandwidths, a few little tweaks to how the cellular tower connects to your device. But then you also have 2 separate frequency bands it operates in. And the promise of tons of bandwidth from 5G, gigabit connectivity, only works with these high frequencies called millimeter wave. And millimeter wave does not work across long distances, nor does it go through trees or walls, unless you're only going 10 feet or something. So the promise of really fast speeds is not going to happen in rural areas. But the iterations of the basic radio connectivity at lower frequencies will. We've seen that with 4G as it's gotten better over time, and 5G will improve that somewhat. It's just not going to be a dramatic difference. You know, if you have today, you have 2 megabits at home via cellular, 5G might bring you 5 or 10. It's not going to bring you 100.
Yeah, so to answer that, from my side, I think the answer is yes in time. It will, like you say, Joel, right? It has to go through an iteration cycle. It's got to continue to grow, you know, be advanced and pushed along, and eventually, right? But from the get-go and where we are today, yeah, not quite yet.
Perfect. Well, I know we went a little over time. We really hope that this webinar was helpful to you, and we really appreciate you spending almost an hour of your day with us. So thank you very much, and please reach out to us if you have any further questions. We'd love to talk to you. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.